Good afternoon everyone, and welcome to today's RTPI webinar on Sustainable Development Goals and Town Planning. My name is Michael Downs and I'm a Town Planner in the Arrett Bristol office and a member of the West of England Young Planners Steering Group. Today I'm joined by Robin Skerritt, 2020 RTPI Young Planner of the Year, Catherine Hutchins from Adurn Morthing Council, and Alan McLeod and Sarah O'Driscoll from Bristol City Council. I'm pleased to say that we have young planners joining from all over the UK today, including Bristol, London, Manchester, Dundee, and even up further north towards the Highlands. Before we begin, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping points to help everyone get the most out of the session. As delegates, you've all been muted. If you have a question for the organiser or speakers, then please send your question via the question box in the GoToWebinar panel, which may be on the top or right of your screen. The speaker's presentation will run for approximately 60 minutes before we come to Q&A. Any questions not answered will be considered after the session and answers emailed to all participants. A copy of the presentation will be included as a handout for you to download from the GoToWebinar panel towards the end of the session. If you personally lose connection to the session, then please try rejoining via the link emailed to you from the GoToWebinar. You may want to ensure your Wi-Fi is at an optimum level by disconnecting all other devices from the Wi-Fi. If the speakers lose connectivity, then please wait in the webinar and keep an eye on your emails in case we have to relaunch the session with a new link. After the presentations, we'll have roughly 15 minutes of questions and we expect the webinar to finish at roughly 6:15. So that's the housekeeping rules done, and I'm really excited to hear from the different speakers organised for today. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the virtual microphone on to Robin Skerritt, RTPI 2020 Young Planner of the Year, who works for the Department for International Development. Robin, do you want to take us away?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's a real honour to be speaking to you all. As Michael said, my name is Robin Skerritt, and I was really honoured to be awarded the RTPI Young Planner of the Year this year. I also, as Michael said, work at the Department for International Development, leading on SDG policy. So while I'm attending the session today in my capacity as Young Planner of the Year, I do bring that background and expertise. This is a real topic that is important to me both professionally and personally, so I'm super excited to be able to give you a bit of an introduction to what the SDGs are, an overview of progress to date and why they are relevant to planning, and then the other speakers will get into a lot more detail providing specific examples. So what are the Sustainable Development Goals? Also the SDGs or global goals? Well, they're a globally agreed framework for the world that we want to see by 2030. They were set up and negotiated and agreed back in 2015 by all 193 UN member states, and that was through a rigorous process of consultation and engagement with a broad range of actors, including civil society and business. So they really do have that kind of global endorsement. And they're comprehensive. They encompass all major development challenges. They look at a broad range of issues, and I'll get into more detail on what they cover in a moment. They have a commitment that underpins all of the SDGs regarding leaving no one behind. And this is about protecting and supporting the most vulnerable in society and making sure that development is genuinely inclusive. The SDGs are measurable and data-driven, which is one of their real USPs. They're underpinned by global targets and global indicators. So the high-level goals have this specificity that sits underneath them. There's 169 global targets and 231 unique global indicators. And in delivering the SDGs, it's all about shared endeavour. So there's this recognition that everybody needs to play a part. So that's governments, businesses, civil society, individuals as well, so that real sense of collective endeavour, and I'll talk more about the role of shared endeavour later on. And what's really unique to the SDGs and what differs to the predecessor Millennium Development Goals is that they have universality. They apply to developed and developing countries alike, so there is this real sense that everyone needs to work together to achieve them. And they have a deadline. We have 10 years left to go, and 2020 was the start of what was called the Decade of Action, and that signals this real need to drive forward and progress on the SDGs. So that's why today's seminar feels very timely. So looking now at what the SDGs cover. So a lot of you may well be familiar with this, but this is an infographic that shows all 17 SDGs. So they really do cover the breadth of development challenges, and I think cover topics that as planners we all think about day in, day out. So for example, they look at good health and well-being as SDG 3, gender equality SDG 5, climate action SDG 13. One that we may think is really important to us as planners and definitely is SDG 11, sustainable communities and cities, but I think we can say they're all relevant to our work. And sometimes one way of grading these 17 SDGs into something slightly more focused is something called the 5 Ps. So this is people, planet, prosperity, peace and partnerships. So that's another way of framing. So if you hear reference to the 5 Ps or those 5 pillars, then that is just another way of summarising what the SDGs pertain to. Apologies. So now looking at progress towards achieving the SDGs. So as I mentioned, they were negotiated and agreed back in 2015. So we've had 5 years of them being in existence thus far. And we definitely have made progress, but global progress is off track, and that was the case before COVID, and COVID-19 and the pandemic has definitely exacerbated some of the challenges associated with achieving the SDGs by 2030. But the conversations that we're having now about building back better, sustainable recovery really are pertinent to the SDGs, and I would argue their relevance is more important than ever. And the UN put forward and published their Sustainable Development Goals Progress Report this year, a couple of months ago now. And in the opening section there's a quote that says, "Far from undermining the case for the SDGs, the root causes and the uneven impacts of COVID demonstrate precisely why we need the SDGs more than ever." And I think that feels very pertinent to today's conversation. And whilst that is sort of looking at a global level, sort of looking within the UK, last year the UK prepared and submitted its first voluntary national review of progress towards the SDGs, which is clicked there. It's the second image, and there will be some links at the end of this slide deck with resources. And as a disclaimer, and as mentioned at the start, I do work in the Department for International Development and led on the preparation of this report. But what I will say about the Voluntary National Review is it really captured the breadth of SDG activity across the 17 goals in the UK. It has both an international and a domestic focus, but the primary focus is on domestic considerations. So there's a huge range of detail in there. It told the story across the 4 parts of the UK of what progress we've made on the SDGs thus far, and has a balance of success and areas of further work, and those areas of further work are highlighted across all of the 17 goals. And to make sure that that report is robust, it is underpinned by data. There's a whole section around how we've used data and an annex, a statistical annex with more data across all of the indicators. And I think the key thing about this report and the SDGs more generally is it's a moment in time, a stepping stone. So production of these reports is not an end in itself, it's what happens next as a result of producing them. And one resource that I did want to mention at this point is the Office for National Statistics National Reporting Platform. And again, there'll be a link at the end to that. The Office for National Statistics report data for the UK on global indicators. They currently report data on 78% of the global indicators, which is really fantastic. We're one of only a handful of countries to report data on over 70% of global indicators. So we do have a really good, strong evidence base. But there is further work to do to identify further sources of data and also make sure that data is as inclusive as possible and disaggregated by different characteristics, one of which is geography. And I know Bristol are doing some interesting work around this and may speak further on that. So we've looked at progress, so just touching now on SDGs and their relevance to planning. So planning is all about the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Is all about the achievement of sustainable development and well-balanced places. So you could argue, on one hand, aren't we already working towards the SDGs already? I think the answer is yes and no, and I'm sure this conversation today will expand on that more. We are doing lots of thinking around sustainable development, but I think the lens the SDGs provide is incredibly helpful, and I think some of the examples that we're going to get into from the subsequent presenters will show what taking an SDG lens and perspective has done to further the work in their individual respective areas. And just going back to this point about shared endeavour, all sectors are incredibly important to deliver the SDGs. That's how they were set up. And there is a statistic by the Cities Alliance that indicates 65% of the global targets that sit under those SDGs need local stakeholder involvement to be achieved. So that kind of sense of collaboration and working across sectors is going to be incredibly important. I think the other thing to bear in mind is the kind of urbanisation that the world is currently experiencing. So a statistic that I kind of frequently quote is about the level of increased urbanisation expected in the forthcoming years, with the world's building stock expected to double by 2060. So that's basically a New York City being added every single month, which is an incredibly huge thing to try and imagine. But that urbanisation, coupled with some of the pressing need for housing within the UK, is really framing some of the thinking and where the SDGs could play an important role. And climate change, that's something that is pressing on so many of our minds. World cities cover 3% of the Earth's landmass, but they account for 60 to 80% of energy consumption and 75% of carbon emissions. So the built environment has a really important role to play in thinking about how we tackle climate change, and therefore the SDGs can be a helpful lens in that regard as well. And as I mentioned, COVID has created further challenges to the delivery of the SDGs, but also a real and exciting window of recovery. And I think the RTPI has been pushing this forward and provoking that discussion through the RTPI Plan the World We Need campaign, which feels really pertinent and perhaps something we can delve into more detail as we get into the Q&A section today. And finally, to conclude, I've given you a bit of an introduction to what the SDGs are at high level, our progress thus far, and the reasons why I think there's really great synergies between planning and the SDGs. And that's where this seminar will really delve into detail on that further. So just to conclude, here's a slide with a few resources that I've mentioned that are there with links, which hopefully will be helpful for you. But thank you so much for listening, and I want to hand back to our next speaker. Thank you.
That's great, Robin. Thank you very much for that. That was really interesting to hear about the progress since 2015. I think particularly your comments about rapid urbanisation when you put out a new New York every month. It's hard to get your head around that. It's quite mind-boggling. And so thank you very much. I'd just like to remind everyone that if they have any questions, please send your questions via the question box in the GoToWebinar panel, which will be on the right or top of your screen. And next up is myself, and Robin's presentation has actually led nicely into mine. So I'm just taking control of the screen. So Robin's presentation has led nicely into mine, and what I'm going to explain now is the importance of looking at the SDGs as a collective group, SDG trade-offs, the SDG policy implementation picture across the UK, and what we town planners can do to contribute towards the delivery of the goals. Daunting problems exist to achieving a sustainable future. Climate change, conflict, inequality, and public health are just some to name a few. Policymakers, sorry, the slides are jumping ahead of me. Policymakers in every country need to reflect on how societies can be made more resilient while confronting these challenges. The achievement of the SDGs are a roadmap towards a sustainable future, and their interlinked nature means that the achievement of the goals will result in a better and more equal society for all. Yet, there will inevitably be some tensions between the goals, raising the critical need to identify trade-offs and ways of addressing these. A trade-off involves sacrificing one aspect of a goal in return for gaining improvements in another when both cannot be fully achieved at the same time. To help you all begin to think about these potential trade-offs, I'm going to ask you a series of questions about the goals to help. So, Charlotte, would you be able to just load the first question in the poll for me, please? So I believe that you'll all have the option to vote here. So the first question I'd like to ask you all is, what goal is more important to you from a personal perspective? Goal 4, quality education. Definition for this is ensure inclusive and quality education for all and promote lifelong learning. Or goal 5, gender equality. And the definition for this is achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. So 15 seconds, please, to answer this question, and we'll be able to then have a look at the answers. So again, what goal is more important to you from a personal perspective? Goal 4, quality education, or goal 5, gender equality? If you can begin to get the answers in for me, and that should be our 15 seconds now. And Charlotte, would you be able to just show the answer to the poll? So we have close to a split there. So we have goal 4, quality education, with 57% of the vote as the goal that people feel is most important to them from a personal perspective. I'd like to say before we go on to the next question that there are no obviously right or wrong answers here. It is totally your own personal opinion, and I'll go on to explain the purpose of these challenging questions. So Charlotte, can we go on to the second question for me, please, in the poll? Just wait for that to load up. So second question I'd like you to think about is, what goal is more important to the city, town or neighbourhood where you currently live? So goal 3, good health and well-being, or goal 8, decent work and economic growth. And definition for good health and well-being: ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages. And goal 8, promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment and decent work for all. So I'll give you just another 10 seconds to get the votes in for that. And it's from the perspective of the city, town or neighbourhood where you currently live, which goal is more important? So Charlotte, can we get questions in? So this time we have that goal 3, good health and well-being. 65% of you thought that was more important than decent work and economic growth to the city, town or neighbourhood where you currently live. So thank you for putting your answers in for that. And Charlotte, can we get the third and final question up, please? And this time is, what goal is more important to town planning? Goal 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure. Definition: build resilient infrastructure, promote sustainable industrialisation and foster innovation. Or goal 13, climate action. Definition is take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. So just another 10, 15 seconds, and this time it's thinking about it from a town planning perspective. Goal 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure, or goal 13, climate action. So that should be our 10 seconds now. So this time we have that 58% of you thought that goal 13, climate action, was more important to town planning than industry, innovation and infrastructure. That's great. Thank you for submitting your questions for that. And Charlotte, can we just go back onto the slides, please? That's great. Thank you. And I'm just going to move that on. So there we go. So thank you for voting. And as I said, there were no right or wrong answers there. The purpose of those questions was to show how difficult it can be doing the trade-offs between the goals. Trade-offs become apparent when examining the targets beneath each goal within the SDG framework. Targets can refer to multiple goals and are connected in different ways. The viability of one target may depend on another being realised, or meeting one target may constrain efforts to realise another. Thus, win-wins may not always be possible, and difficult choices will need to be made in a multitude of ways. To achieve successful trade-offs, a collective consideration of the goals is required. As you've all just done there, picking one goal entirely over another will result in one key aspect of a sustainable future not being achieved. Transitioning towards more sustainable and resilient societies requires an integrated approach that recognises that these challenges and their solutions are interrelated. Different disciplines and professions can sometimes be a bit siloed in their approach, and this can result in conflicts being created. The classic example of this is the environment versus the economy, but we also have examples of life on land versus life on water. The SDGs create a framework to support the best trade-offs happening where required and consideration of one another to ensure that a more sustainable and resilient future is created. I think town planners, potentially more than other professionals, have a greater awareness that to achieve a sustainable future, there needs to be collaboration and consideration of many different elements and factors. Although we may all have differing levels of awareness of the goals themselves, including no poverty, sustainable cities and communities, and climate action, will all be related and are important to our daily jobs as town planners, as Rob mentioned, and we consider the issues related to the SDGs on a daily basis. Some may be more obvious. For example, if you are a town planner who's doing a lot of work relating to supporting high street regeneration, the goal industry, innovation and infrastructure obviously aligns with the work that you do, and depending on the city, town or neighbourhood that you're working in, it could be of national importance, although obviously all town centre work is of critical importance to the local or surrounding area. But there may be some of you who don't see how what they do contributes to the delivery of the SDGs directly. If we think about it from a development management perspective, for those that potentially assess housing applications, the enforcement of the national space standards to me contributes towards goal number 3, good health and well-being. Many of us are still working from home for a significant proportion of our time each week, and if people live in substandard housing with a lack of space, working from home during this time will be very difficult from a well-being perspective. Hence, the enforcement of the national space standards helps to ensure that people's well-being is protected. National level policy has a key role to play in the UK coordinating the correct trade-offs to achieve the SDGs. Policy must acknowledge the interconnections between the goals within and between countries and the areas we live and work within. Implementation across the UK at a national policy level in consideration of the goals is currently patchy, with commitments at a national policy level from a planning and non-planning perspective differing quite significantly. The current national planning policy framework in England is a prime example of the absence of the SDGs in key planning policy. The recent Planning for the Future white paper failed to include specific mention to the SDGs. Proposals in the white paper include abolishing the existing sustainability appraisal and to create a slimmed down assessment and deliverability for local plans in the form of a sustainable development test. We're still awaiting further information what this exactly looks like, and we'll wait to see if the SDGs are included in our consideration. The Planning Scotland Act 2019 states that the purpose of planning is to manage the development and use of land in the long-term public interest, which ties planning to sustainable development and the delivery of the Scottish national outcomes, Scottish national outcomes aim to get all people, sectors and professions working together to create a more sustainable future for Scotland. At one point, this vision for Scotland did specifically include reference to the SDGs, but this was actually changed as the bill passed into Act. National Planning Framework 4, Scotland's national planning policy, is at the initial stages of preparation. It has been positive to hear that National Planning Framework 4 might include monitoring mechanisms aligned with the indicators for SDG Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. In Wales, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act imposes a statutory requirement on all public bodies to achieve sustainable development. The wellbeing goals created by the Act are monitored with 46 national indicators which align to but are not an exact match with the SDGs. They reflect the established practice of a localised approach to sustainable development. The Act is regarded as an example of global best practice of the integration of the SDGs into national policy for its strong legal standing, coherent structure and robust choice of indicators. In Northern Ireland, a sustainable development strategy, Everyone's Involved, produced in 2010, informs the approach of the Northern Ireland Executive to sustainability, while the Northern Ireland Regional Development Strategy 2035, which was also produced in 2010, constitutes the spatial strategy for Northern Ireland. Yet, as both documents predate the SDGs, their alignment of planning policy to the SDGs is less obvious than elsewhere in the UK. The SDGs being mostly absent at national policy level across the UK is a barrier to them being considered of greater value and relevance to town planning. Yet, as you'll hear more of from Catherine, Alan and Sarah's presentations, it is not a complete roadblock by any means. I believe that those of us that work in the planning or built natural environment profession can use the goals to shape a more sustainable future. To do this, I believe that town planners can drive the inclusion of the SDGs into our work practices in the future. This would include learning from best practice and showcasing the value the inclusion of the SDGs into town planning creates. For local authorities that are reviewing their development plan or private sector companies that are preparing an application for submission, the consultation stage can be an opportunity to raise awareness of the goals. Local authorities have to gather evidence as part of their local plan review and cooperate with other local bodies. This can provide an opportunity to proactively engage with environmental and other statutory consultee bodies and explore ways to deliver the SDGs locally. Statutory consultation for planning application provides an opportunity to use the SDGs to show the link between the development proposed and the local area. This could include the economic, health or education benefits created by a proposed development. Identifying goals relevant to a development is an effective visual aid to show how it is linked to the economy, environment and health and well-being of residents in an area. I believe that town planners can be important leaders and drivers of the goals. As I've discussed already, town planners potentially have a greater understanding of the importance of an integrated approach between professions and disciplines to achieve a sustainable and resilient future. The SDGs don't allow any one agenda to dominate, with each of the goals being considered of equal value and importance. Planners from both the public and private sector should work together along with other professionals in the built and natural environment, to help ensure solutions are found and the correct trade-offs of the goals occur to achieve a sustainable future. A solid understanding of national, regional and local governance is required to do this. Town planners can't do everything to achieve the goals for the UK themselves. I don't think any one profession can, but a good understanding is required of what town planning can do to contribute towards the goals from a policy perspective. Planners working towards achieving the SDGs need to be able to adapt and modify the aims and objectives to help achieve creative solutions towards changing targets and expectations. We've seen this year that so much change has happened in relation to the way that we interact with people and the built natural environment around us. The ability to adapt and modify our actions in an informed way to new and existing challenges and opportunities will contribute towards the delivery of the SDGs. Robin has alluded to this already, but the RTPI website has an excellent module on the SDGs that I'd really recommend for you all to go have a look at and complete in order to kind of see some further information about what town planners can do to contribute towards the delivery of the goals. In conclusion, I hope that those of you attending today will take forward the knowledge learned and implement it into working practices. Quick and affirmative action is required from a national to an individual level to help achieve the goals by 2030. It will not be without its challenges, but I hope town planning can help contribute towards the UK achieving the goals along with other professions in the natural environment. So I'd like to thank you all for listening for what I had to say on the goals today. And next up we have Catherine Hutchins from Adurn Worthing Council, who will discuss how they have begun looking at embedding the SDGs in the emerging Worthing local plan. So Catherine, do you want to just take us away?
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. Let me just get control of the screen. So my name's Kat Hutchins. I work for Ada and Worthing Councils in the planning policy team. I'm going to be sharing with you our experience of embedding the UN Sustainable Development Goals into our Worthing local plan. I have noticed my audio keeps losing connection, so if that happens, I'll just pause until it reconnects. So for those that don't know, Worthing is located in West Sussex. We are about 10 miles west of Brighton. Being in the southeast, we are largely affluent authority. However, we do have some pockets of significant deprivation, and these have really been highlighted through the recent pandemic. We have an 8-year difference in life expectancy between the wards with the highest and the lowest. We have 3 wards in the lowest 20% of areas in England and a significant affordability issue with house prices around 11 times that of average earnings. As you can see from the map, we are sandwiched between the national park to the north and the sea to the south. Our local plan area is a part of the borough outside of the national park. So the land that we have outside of our built-up area boundary for further development is extremely limited, and due to that we have significant development pressures. So our current adopted plan is the Worthing Core Strategy, which was adopted in 2011, that planned for 200 homes per year. Work started on our new local plan in 2016, and at the start our members gave us a really clear steer that sustainability needed to be a key focus of the plan. We consulted on our draft plan in 2018, and we are currently preparing the submission draft version. Under the current methodology, our housing figure is around 860 homes per year, and our local plan is likely to be planning for around 260 homes per year. So we have a significant shortfall that we are going to have to justify. In July 2019, Ada and Worthing councils declared a climate emergency, and through this committed to being carbon neutral by 2030 and clean energy by 2050. These commitments are being brought forward through our Sustainable Ada Worthing programme, which is a shared plan between communities and the council with 10 areas of focus, including planning within that. To respond to the declaration, we also published a planning and climate change position statement, and we're currently working on sustainability checklists. The climate emergency declaration for us working on the local plan really signified that our plan needed to be even more robust in relation to climate change, and that sustainability needed to form the bedrock of the plan. So when considering how to do that, we came across the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We liked that they are internationally and nationally recognised, and that they were being held up by the RTPI as best practice, and a number of other authorities had had success embedding them. The goals provide a blueprint for a better and more sustainable future for all. They cover a range of global issues, and they offer an interconnected framework of goals, targets, and indicators. The first thing we did was a mapping exercise to look at the compatibility, and to do that we literally mapped out our policies against the goals and targets. And what we found from that was that our policies did align very nicely, in fact, with a number of the goals and targets, although there were some which related less closely to planning, perhaps more so to wider council goals. This also allowed us to undertake a bit of a gap analysis, but from this we decided that this was something we wanted to try and embed within our local plan. It was really vital for us to get buy-in. We presented to our directors, our members working group, and to all members. As a council, we haven't adopted them more widely. The feedback we received was there was some concern around whether it could cause confusion due to coordination of the local plan with the SDGs rather than our wider corporate goals. But equally, there was a real benefit that they offered in terms of partnership working. And for us, we didn't view that it was an issue. We considered we could go ahead embedding them within our local plan and hopefully embed them at a later date into wider council strategies. As part of this, in March 2020, we held the Zero 2030 Climate Conference with over 300 delegates. And as part of that conference, we facilitated a workshop on planning and tested our proposal to use the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We've also got a climate assembly planned for later this year. In our workshop, we focused on number 11, goal 11, sustainable cities and communities, which is the one sort of most often cited as being most closely related to planning. And specifically, we looked at 11.7, which is around access to safe, inclusive and accessible green and public spaces for all. This is a really key issue for us locally, given that we are such a constrained authority, and with the pockets of deprivation. It's also been a really key issue for everyone with the recent lockdown. And for our authority and our visit also relates quite closely to the issue of climate justice. In the workshop, we tested our green infrastructure policy in relation to that goal and target, and we received really positive feedback on ways in which we could align more closely with wider strategies such as our local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, and opportunities for more innovative GI, particularly for urban high density developments. And these actions are now being taken forward through our GI strategy. So once we had decided we wanted to embed and use the SDGs, we needed to think about how to do that within our plan document. For us, our plan is very much structured along economic, social and environmental chapters, with our strategic objectives set out according to those categories, as well as our development management policies ordered in those groups. So at the front end of our plan, we've taken the decision to set out, like what you can see here, and it shows right through the relevant policies, how they relate to the vision and strategic objectives, and how they relate to the sustainable development goals. So they really are like a thread going throughout the plan. We're also considering taking a similar approach with our SA. We've already got our framework set up, but aligning those objectives to those goals, which will help later with the monitoring. The monitoring for us is the real strength of the SDGs. They provide an accepted and consistent and much more robust framework. It is important to localize them. We need to consider the data we have available. We also need to consider the context, both geographically and in relation to the local plan, given that the targets and indicators as they stand are very much more global. This also helps us align the SA. Our intention was always to use the same monitoring framework for the SA and the local plan, and by linking both to the goals, again, it gives that thread between them. So for us, I think our key lessons are that it is important to get buy-in. The goals do relate to our local plan, but they actually relate much more closely to our wider corporate aims. But don't let that stop you. We haven't. You can go ahead without that. Second, the importance to localize those targets, work with other services, consider the data you have available and the data that you can collect, and also your geographical context. I think for us, we are very aware that we've possibly done the easy bit, and moving forward with the implementation and the monitoring, once we hopefully get our local plan adopted and in place, will be much more difficult given the current changing context, what with climate change, COVID, and now the white paper too. Our hope is that the inclusion of the goals will enhance the rounded sustainability credentials due to the way they balance the different issues and don't allow a single one to dominate, and also provide a much more robust monitoring framework for our local plan. We can really see, looking ahead, how the goals could possibly in the future help form a uniform monitoring tool for local authorities. And I would have said prior to publication of the white paper, a uniform SA framework, but that is very much an unknown at the moment. So thank you for listening.
That's great.
Great.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Alan. I was just going to pass on to yourself. So thank you, Catherine, first of all, for that presentation. It was excellent, and particularly the lessons learned at the end I thought were really interesting. So next up it is Alan McLeod. So I'll just pass it on to you, Alan. Apologies.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so my name's Alan McLeod. I'm the Bristol SDG Research and Engagement Associate, and I'll be speaking briefly about some of our process of, as Catherine was just talking about, localising the Sustainable Development Goals in Bristol, before then passing on to my colleague from the City Council, Sarah, who's going to be talking a little bit more about how we begin to embed the SDGs into our planning processes in Bristol. So, in Bristol, the localisation process grew out of grassroots advocacy, and that grew out of a partnership that we have called the SDG Alliance. This is a network in the city that was formed towards the end of our Green Capital year in 2015, that was organised to try and figure out what it looks like to use the Sustainable Development Goals in a local context, in a city context. And this is a network with all sorts of actors from across the city, public sector, private sector, charities, communities, as well as some of our key anchor institutions. And the alliance that we had in Bristol was supported by a University of Bristol funded project to try and help stakeholders in the city understand how they could use the Sustainable Development Goals. So it was hosted by the Bristol Green Capital Partnership and supported by Bristol City Council and the University of Bristol. And this was through a role, my role, the SDG in Research and Engagement Associate, to try and understand what was going on elsewhere in the world, try and look into the context of localization of SDGs elsewhere, and then apply that to Bristol, as well as working with local stakeholders. And the result of this has been a great increase in activity and interest in the SDGs in the city. The SDG Alliance, as I said, is this cross-sector network that we have. It's grown to over 140 members, and it meets on a regular basis to discuss about local action and national and international opportunities around the SDGs. Contains public, private sector and academia, and we really try and collaborate to work well on the delivery and implementation of the goals in the city, as well as to encourage the council to step up its efforts. And the Alliance has been a key advocacy tool in demonstrating the desire for the use of the SDGs in Bristol, and so it's been a real benefit to the city in terms of encouraging local politicians and city council staff in the use of the goals. Just a bit of background, all of this occurred at the same time as the city was undergoing a period of strategic restructuring towards wider governance. So thinking about some of the longer term planning for the city. On the right there, you can see the One City Plan. There's a copy of that in the handouts. And this is a longer term planning process that we've undergone in the city. Try to hear from voices of communities, businesses, organisations to think about how we can try and partner towards some of that longer term sustainable development and coalesce around a common vision for the city. That common vision is that in 2050, Bristol is a fair, healthy and sustainable city, a city of hope and aspiration where everyone can share in its success. And underpinning this vision are 6 themes, and underpinning all of those themes are the Sustainable Development Goals. They're a key milestone for us in our delivery of the plan. It was launched in 2019, and it's something that we're updating and iterating every year. The plan contains a number of initiatives and objectives, and every single one of these is mapped against the SDGs. You probably can't see very clearly here, but each of those different colours for every year has 3 initiatives, and that's every year until 2050. So there's something like over 500 odd initiatives in the plan. Every single one of those has been mapped against an SDG target, and that resulted in a set of 79 SDG targets that were relevant to Bristol's priorities. We wanted to use the SDGs as a benchmark for our One City Plan goals and try and use the targets to provide a monitoring framework for the plan. And as a result, we undertook Bristol's voluntary local review. Robin earlier mentioned about the national review and the process that DFID undertook to do that, and we tried to do a similar process at the local level in Bristol. We received some funding from the Economic Social Research Council to produce this, and we reviewed all 17 SDGs. Again, there's a copy of this report in the handouts section. This used over 140 indicators to provide a comprehensive baseline for our SDG work. And we consulted with city partners, recognizing, as Michael was saying, that actually this is something where we need to be working with partners in the delivery of this. And similarly, Catherine was saying that actually the use of the SDGs has been really important in engaging with local partners. And so we wanted to reflect that in our work. Bristol was the first UK city to do this, to undertake a VLR, and one of the first in the world, the second in Europe, just behind Helsinki, unfortunately. And we wanted to do this to, as I said, to provide a benchmark, but also to provide wider engagement within the city. The VLR allowed us to connect with and speak to groups that hadn't previously engaged with our SDG work, and it resulted in a large increase in interest in the SDG Alliance and in the work that we've been doing in the city on the SDGs. As a result, we've had increased interaction from the education sector, from businesses, from charities, and recently we've been working with our economy board to think about how the SDGs can be used in our economic recovery planning post-COVID. Additionally, it provided transparent accountability on this global framework. It allowed us to understand how the interconnections across these goals are playing out in the city and where we're standing on all of these issues. Again, I mentioned this already, but it provided a common language for local partnerships to discuss how their efforts and their commitments were meeting not only local issues, but global issues, and communicating those across a wide range of interest groups. Bristol also wanted to demonstrate some of its city leadership and trying to take on action in engaging with the goals. And as you may not know, but Bristol is a city with over 180 countries represented and 91 languages spoken in the city. And so we wanted to reflect our international city. The next steps for our work on the SDGs is firstly around some of our economic renewal. I mentioned already that we're trying to ensure that our COVID recovery work is based on the SDGs and focuses on that. We're looking to try and use the goals as a framework and a lens to analyse our recovery planning and to ensure that as we build back better, as Robin was already mentioning. We're trying to use those goals to drive inclusivity and environment in our recovery planning and ensure that our economic recovery isn't just about providing an economic stimulus. On top of that, we're now working with the Office for National Statistics to look at supporting other local authorities in the UK on accessing local data for the SDGs and on producing VLRs. We've written a handbook to try and help UK cities to engage with the SDGs and to understand how they can be writing their own SDG VLRs and why they would want to do this. But we're also working to produce a platform for local authorities to look at data. The Office for National Statistics already has a number of indicators disaggregated to the local level, but what we're trying to do is work with the Office for National Statistics to provide local platforms so that individual councils can share their own data on their own dashboards. And so we're working with the SDG team there to do that. And as I mentioned already, we're also working to embed the SDGs into our local development and planning documents. So I'm now going to hand over to Sarah from the Bristol City Council planning team to share a little bit more about what that's looked like and what that process has been. Sarah.
Hi, thank you, Alan. So yes, hello everybody. So I feel like I've got a distinct advantage at coming at the end and being able to support almost everything, I think, if not more, that Catherine has already said around the benefits and the way in which we can work on taking and embedding the Sustainable Development Goals in the planning process. So great to be able to see what Catherine's been saying first. So let me just move the slides on. So let's go back one. So translating, as Alan said, what we've been doing as a city into how we're working with our local plan preparation. So just like Catherine and Ada, we've had a local plan. We've had our core strategy adopted since 2011, so an interesting synergy there. And when we prepared that core strategy, we found that took us. Sorry, there's my timer going off, which is a frustrating thing, isn't it? I'm going to have to sit on it. So translating that into the sustainability goals that we had, we've already built in sustainability as an aspiration and had that golden thread running right through our local authority documents, which we've had in place since 2011. We were a full set of adopted documents by 2014, but we had a commitment to review our local plan in 2016, so similarly. And from 2016, we started that process of reviewing particularly how our housing policies were working. And we did that alongside our adjoining authorities, so the other authorities in the West of England area. And some of you will be aware that we started the preparation of a joint spatial plan, which went to examination, was at examination last year. It didn't progress through the examination process for a whole range of background issues, but that has given us the opportunity to start afresh, working at the West of England level on preparing a new sustainable development strategy, and in preparing both our local plan review and our West of England wide, our West of England Combined Authority Spatial Development Strategy. We've got the opportunity to embed a review of our policy approach using the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's quite an interesting opportunity all around. Both of those, as it says there, both intended for adoption by 2020. That would be lovely. It's both intended for adoption by December 2023. A bit more realistic. So to make sure that we engaged at a West of England Combined Authority level on the Sustainable Development Goals, we worked really closely with the leaders and the mayors. It took a little bit of working through, but we have got all leaders and mayors for the three authorities to commit to embedding and working with the United Nations Sustainable Goals through a memorandum of understanding and through a statement of common ground, which is very shortly due for publication. So we've got that upfront commitment through mayors and leaders, which I think is going to be important as we take that process through. The way in which we're practically using the local plan forward is by looking particularly at our existing local plan and reviewing the content of the local plan against those one city plan themes, which Alan has already set out for you. And those that one city document that Alan showed you with all the different colours on contains quite a number of our existing local plan commitments embedded into those delivery commitments. So we've got a bit of a head start on that. We already know exactly what it is we need to deliver. But this process is helping us to review effectively how the gaps have appeared in our local plan and where the gaps are in the targets and indicators going forward. So we've been doing that in a similar way to Catherine, looking at the one city themes, looking at our local plan objectives and looking at the relevant United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, doing that against every theme and headline to get that progressing through. We've taken that on and we're starting to refresh our emerging local plan policies. So although we began our review in 2016, because we've been tied to the preparation of a joint document for the West of England Combined Authority area, we are having to wait until those high-level commitments and high-level numbers come out of that process. But we do have emerging draft local plan policies. So we've looked at those emerged local plan policies and looking at the extent to which those are already fit for purpose against the SDGs. I think one of the most useful things that the SDGs are going to give us and the targets is a more effective way of getting monitoring going forward. So getting more effective targets and indicators that we can really use to check the effectiveness of our policies as they go forward. And that's going to be one of the best opportunities it has us. So as Catherine has said, we've got a range of different challenges, haven't we? Not just COVID, not just the local plan process, but also a changing local plan process. So we're not clear exactly where we're going to be this time next year, I guess. what I think the Sustainable Development Goals will give us here is something, is kind of a bit of an opportunity to rebase and reassess and to get ourselves ready. So as we've got here, this text comes from a commitment which our Mayor made in the journey towards the West of England Combined Authority Sustainable Development Strategy Memorandum of Understanding. So being ready, committing to the SDGs gives us the opportunity for a shared vision and a rationale for today's challenges and tomorrow's growth. So for Bristol, we have both, we've acknowledged and committed to addressing both climate and ecological emergencies. We've obviously committed to dealing with the carbon challenge by 2020, to ensuring that equality and clean and inclusive growth comes all the way through. And every commitment there can be measured directly against the Sustainable Development Goal. And when we get to the end of this process, having the infrastructure and the resilience in place so that we as an authority and as a whole city, in that one city partnership approach, are part of that bigger global conversation, so that we're not just doing this to suit ourselves, we're doing this to suit the wider commitment for our future as a community in the broadest sense at the global level. So I think probably that's just that commitment that we can't do the work we do in a bubble, that we need to do it in the broader context, is really the main message I want to just share with you today. And I think it's probably something which we've all been looking for a little bit of a tool and a bit of a framework to help us with. So that's my share for today. Thanks very much. And I think I'll hand back now to Michael.
That's great, Sarah. Thank you very much. Thanks to you and Alan there for your presentations. It's great to hear about the work that both of you have been doing in Bristol. So thank you very much for presenting on that. And we're going to move on to the Q&A part of the session. So can I just ask all presenters to turn your cameras back on, please, so everyone can see who will be answering the questions. Thank you very much. So got the questions here, and the first question was asked is just in terms of, for Robin, it was, how can I come across the SDG 2020 report? And that is actually available as it's referenced on Robin's slides. And one of the other questions was, are these slides available? And yes, they'll now be available as a handout in the GoToWebinar panel there. So you'll be able to download them, and then from there you'll be able to access the SDG 2020 report. So what we'll do is I'll read out the questions that were received, and if any speakers just want to put up their hands, and then they'll be able to take the question away from there. So the first question is, what are the major challenges faced by planners in implementing the SDGs? Anyone want to answer that one? Robin?
Hi there. Well, thank you all so much for really interesting presentations. I've been scribbling notes as you've all been speaking. I think for me, I kind of want to flip this question on its head, because I know planners, whatever capacity we're working in, have a huge range of kind of challenges that we're grappling with and a long to-do list. But I think one of the things I'd really sort of encourage you all to think about is the SDGs are based on that kind of principle of shared endeavour and individual action as well. So maybe just taking a kind of one thing that you could do off the back of today's seminar to kind of start the conversation wherever you work or whatever you're doing, whether that's be studying or whatever, to think about how the SDGs may be relevant to your work. So that might be completing the RTPI Learn module that takes about an hour, which is a really good deep dive into some of the issues we've spoken about today, or having a conversation with your team about where the SDGs might fit with your work. So I found that to be really, really interesting, and actually I've been really positively surprised how much interesting work is going on with a whole range of different organisations that may not be necessarily immediately apparent, but actually it provokes a really interesting and detailed discussion. So yeah, now you've attended today's webinar, you're all SDG advocates as well, so I'd be really excited to hear what actions you may be able to take away. That's just a couple of examples, but I think the more that we talk about the SDGs, the more that we think about how they relate to the work that we all do, and there's a real opportunity there for just to kind of further build that awareness and draw those links and increase that momentum further. So I think we can all play a role, whatever capacity and whatever we're doing. Over.
Oh, Sarah. Thank you,
Yeah,
Robin.
Michael, just a quick one, because I think there may well be amongst some people sort of an instinctive resistance. Do we really need to do this? Because we've always been working towards having sustainability. We've already got our targets. I think the message to give really is that this is a really useful framework for thinking. Unless it's a task you need to be doing anyway, use this framework. You can move the process forward quite swiftly and gain a better insight and a better contribution broadly to the delivery of the product. So just on a resources message, so this isn't necessarily additional to what you should be doing, it's part of what you should be doing.
That's great, Sarah. And Catherine as well?
I think, like myself, and I know Sarah said as well, one of the key strengths of using the goals is in monitoring and making that more robust. In terms of the challenges, I know one of the challenges we've been experiencing is localizing those targets in a way that you're using data you've got readily available, but you're not sort of making fit, you're not losing sight of what that goal or target is. So it'd be interesting to see the work coming out from Bristol and what Alan was mentioning in terms of platforms and things.
Yeah, could I just jump in on that, Michael? Is that all right?
Of course.
Yeah, so I think one of the key challenges that I find when I'm speaking to, well, even within our own city, one of the key challenges we faced initially, and then speaking to other cities as well, is that challenge of data and trying to find the right data and trying to present that data in a way that's effective and meaningful. It's one of the targets that as a nation we've signed up to. It's under Goal 17, one of the targets around disaggregating data for local levels. But it's something that we need to do better at. As a country, we, as Rob mentioned, the Office for National Statistics are leading on data globally. They're one of the best groups for data reporting at the national level, and that's a real encouragement, and they've got a real ambition and drive to try and disaggregate more data and to present more disaggregated data. And I think as that happens more, what we'll hopefully see is more engagement from local authorities and from planners and from just from all stakeholders across society as that is more accessible. But it is a challenge at the moment, and it's a challenge that people are facing across the world in terms of how can we monitor these goals in a way that's meaningful. But I think many people stop there, and they stop at the point of monitoring because they want to be benchmarking. But actually, one of the benefits of the goals is the opportunity to do bench learning, where instead of comparing apples to apples data, we're able to have conversations about the same targets, and we're able to learn from each other on initiatives that compare across different monitoring systems, but the same targets. And one of the benefits we've really found has been around those conversations we've been able to have with other cities nationally and internationally about the goals and about the work that they're doing, and learning from them on the project level and on the delivery level, rather than directly saying that we have to have exactly the same monitoring framework. And I think that is sometimes a challenge that people face, is they get stuck with the data or stuck with the targets, trying to figure out exactly what needs to happen. And actually, what I would say as a challenge back to that is actually to sort of to start where you are and to engage with what you have, and then begin to work from there. And that's been our approach in Bristol. We don't claim to have a perfect data framework yet. There's definitely gaps, and we've written about them in our voluntary local review. But what we're trying to do, and I think this is, from my understanding, the same approach that DFID and the Office for National Statistics are doing, is as we work on this more, as we continue to refine that, we're going to be developing a more accurate reporting system, and we're going to be improving the way that we talk about these goals. And so as we work on the goals more, as we look into the goals more, as there's more awareness, we'll be filling in some of those gaps. And I think that's the key thing, is if we don't start, then we won't get to that point. But it's about starting and engaging and finding those opportunities to learn.
That's excellent, Alan. Thank you. That was 4 excellent answers, so thank you very much for that. Catherine, is actually a question for yourself in relation to the work that you've been doing when you done the gap analysis. Were there any goals that were not covered or not identified as required? And was this perceived to be an issue that needed addressing? Or were you able to explain the fact that there was gaps? And I think that might be related to what you said, Alan, just yourself as well, like gaps in kind of information. So that kind of initial gap analysis, what did you find from that? And also what constraints were there in the gap analysis that you undertook?
Yeah, there were gaps in respect of there were some goals that just didn't really align themselves very well with our local plan. Off the top of my head, things like the goal around peace, and they're quite hard for local plans to deliver. In terms of the gap analysis, what was quite useful was some of the individual targets helped us look at where we could strengthen our plan some more strategically, particularly in terms of like health and well-being, that kind of thing.
Excellent, thank you. So a question I've had there is, what stakeholders do you see as key collaborators to create effective solutions towards the SDGs? I don't know if anyone would like to answer this one. So kind of what are the key stakeholders, potentially the key stakeholders that you've worked with as part of the work you've done developing the plans? Or Robin, yourself, just in the work that you've been doing in terms of preparing the National Voluntary Review?
Hi there, I'm happy to come in and then maybe Alan can give some experience with Bristol. So in terms of preparing the Voluntary National Review, there was such a broad range of sort of interested parties, and we did it in a kind of 4 phases of different engagements. And so things like call for case studies was something that we did. We also did visiting lots of different parts of the UK to do kind of engagement events, and then collated all of that information together. And actually within the Voluntary National Review, we've got a whole, across all of the report, there's the case study boxes. So there's lots of really kind of practical examples of what different people and different organisations across the UK are doing in relation to the SDGs. So I think that the breadth of stakeholders is initially quite overwhelming, but I think reflecting on the kind of conversation and the points made in the earlier question, actually start somewhere and then build out. And I think if you wrote a list of everybody that needed to be involved at the start, you'd probably find that a bit overwhelming. But I also think using your existing networks as well in your existing engagement groups, this doesn't have to be something that's brand new. It's a framing tool, as mentioned before. So I think about how it can dock into what you're already doing and enhance on that and build on that further. But I'll pass over to Alan now, because I know there's some really interesting work happening in Bristol. Over to you.
I think from our end, one of the key partners that we've had and key stakeholders in this has been the university and the support of the university in this. Initially, some of our SDG activity with the council started out of a master's report, master's consultancy project that we undertook in the city, and the university has funded a chunk of the work that we've been doing in Bristol. But I think probably what I'd say is that, you know, there's a real benefit in using some of the key anchor institutions like the university, like the city council, some of the larger institutions, larger employers in your area. And as a result of that, you get more buy-in, and there's more interest from then other stakeholders if they find out that those groups are being engaged. But I think, as Robin was saying, using some of those networks that are already in place. So what we were able to do with our voluntary local review consultation was use the alliance that we already had, use the SDG Alliance. And we were fortunate that that SDG Alliance contained a number of networks within it. And so we were able to connect through our Chamber of Commerce and through our environmental network and VOSCA, the voluntary sector network that we had in the city, and sort of cascade the information down through those networks to try and increase awareness, increase engagement, and then find willing partners, as it were. The Alliance is informal as a network, but actually it's been powered by the willing energy of its participants, and some of our most willing participants have been a real range. You know, we've had sustainability consultants from some of our large employers in the city like Arup and McLeod, but we've also had key engagement from some of our law firms like Burgess Salmon, and also from the zoo as well. So it's been a real range in terms of who the key partners have been and how that's helped drive our activity in the city. So
we've also interestingly had a visit with the planning inspectorate, Alan, haven't we? So
yeah, that too.
We went and shared some thinking with the planning inspectorate, so at their invitations, that was an interesting visit too.
Excellent, that's good to hear. What we'll do is we've got a few great questions here, and we will get back to all questions, but a kind of question that I'd just like to ask everyone, or each of the presenters, just as a bit of a roundup, is what advice would you give to someone starting on their SDG journey? So Alan, you're first on my screen here, so would you like to give the first answer, unfortunately?
I think it's about starting with the goals or the area of interest to you. Once you begin to, the way I talk about it sometimes is, as you open the door to one of the goals, you will immediately begin to recognize the interconnections and the crossover with the other goals. And so I think if there's one goal or one area that you have particular passion about, start with that and then begin to look at how that overlaps and how that connects to the other areas of the goals. Because sometimes I think people get overwhelmed by the complexity and the iterations and the numbers of the targets and all sorts of things. And yeah, I think my key piece of advice would be, you know, you've joined this webinar, so you've done the first step, and, but the next step would be, yeah, pick up one of those goals, begin to think about what that means, how you can be working on that, as Robin was sort of saying earlier, you know, what are the things that you can be doing, what are the ways that you can be advocating for the goals, and take it from there, I think. Don't get overwhelmed.
Thanks, Alan. Robin?
Great question. And Alan, I think I really resonate with your answer there. I guess the other thing is that even within the last 18 months, there's been a whole range of really relevant resources that have been produced that are relevant to people working in the UK context. So I think I feel like that's a really, really positive step. So whether it's an hour to do the RTPI Learn module on the SDGs, or reading the recently published guide that the local government associations put out about the relevance of the SDGs to local authorities, or another resource that we've mentioned today that might be relevant to kind of continuing building on the learning we've taken from today's webinar. I think that really is something that I've noticed has been hugely helpful and has been produced by people who've actually done this and recognise how to do it and some of the challenges and barriers. And so I think tap into those fantastic resources, and I think reach out to people as well, and sort of ask questions, seek advice, because actually I found people that are working on the SDGs to be super passionate about it and actually super keen to connect and talk about it and collaborate. So I think really thinking about your network and contacting people that have an interest in this as well, whether that's through LinkedIn or other means, I think that is a really great way of kind of continuing your SDG journey.
Thank you, Robin. Catherine?
I would say think about what you've already got, think about what you're trying to achieve and the context, and use that as your starting point and try and map that to the goals rather than start looking at all the goals. Start with what you've got and your aims and priorities.
That's great, Catherine. Thank you very much. And finally, Sarah. Don't
panic. So don't panic. You've got the capacity, you've got the tools, they're basic planning tools, and you've probably got the willingness out there in your stakeholders. So there will be people out there you can draw on in almost every context who will be very pleased and happy to back you in the journey.
That's great, Sarah. Thank you very much for that, and thank you to you all. I've personally really enjoyed listening to you all today and preparing the presentations today. Thank you very much for giving up your time this evening in order to speak for all of us in the RTPI group. I'd like to say thank you as well to Charlotte from the RTPI as well, that's played a key role in helping to support this event and organise it. Without it, it wouldn't have happened. And I'd also like to say a big thank you to all of you that have attended. I hope that you've taken away a few lessons and nuggets of information from tonight, and you feel empowered to put the SDGs into planning practice in your daily roles. So thank you very much for attending, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye bye.